Julie Maloney, and I have the honor of serving as the chair of the City Club Missoula's Board of Directors. Thank you for being here today. City Club's mission is to bring people together to inform and inspire them on issues vital to the community through public forums that engage the discussion of new ideas and the free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse, even when we discuss challenging issues. Before introductions, some thank yous. Thanks to Missoula Community Access Television, which records our forums as part of their media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190. MCAT occasionally live streams our forums on its local live platform as well. You can find videos of past CCM forums by clicking the video button on our website, cityclubmissoula.com. Many thanks to our sponsors, especially those at the executive level. They are Blackfoot Communications and First Security Bank. Our executive level sponsors are key partners in helping to expand audience access and reliably planning and conducting our forums. We're grateful to all our sponsors as well as our members, and we invite you to join them. Thank you also to our board of directors and our new administrator, Jenny Rohrbach. On behalf of the City Club Missoula, we acknowledge that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. Today, we honor the path they have always shown us in caring for this place and for the generations to come. We are grateful to share this special place with our neighbors and friends. Our panelists for today's panel are Eran Pehan, Paul Forsting, and Len Broberg. Eran has been engaged in community development and social equity work in Montana for the last 20 years. As Director of Community Planning, Development, and Innovation for the City of Missoula, Eran brings a depth of experience in social infrastructure planning and innovative problem solving. Prior to her current role, she was the director of the city's Office of Housing and Community Development and served as the executive director of the Poverello Center. Paul is an American Institute of Certified Planner who is a senior land use planner for IMEG, Missoula's office. Paul is currently the past president of the Missoula Building Industry Association. At IMEG, Paul leads a team of planners who works daily with builders and developer clients who utilize Missoula's land use codes. And finally, Len is a 29-year Missoula resident who served as faculty in the Environmental Studies program at the University of Montana for 28 of those years. Trained as a lawyer and a biologist, Len has served as a past Missoula City County Subdivision Regulation Revision Task Force member and as a past member and chair of the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board. He's chair of the Montana chapter of Sierra Club, a member organization of Common Good Missoula, where he serves as a core team leader, a strategy team member, and chair of an action research team. I'll hand it off to you three. Thanks for being here.
So good afternoon, Eran Pehan with the City of Missoula, and I am going to kick off our presentation today and then turn it over to Paul and Len to share from their unique perspective as well. So I'm going to start by grounding us in some context around the Our Missoula Growth Policy Update and Code Reform Project, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some legislative action that happened this year through Senate Bill 382 and how that's intermingling with or impacting the work that we're doing as we move ahead. So to start, the Our Missoula Code Reform and Growth Policy Project is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to define how we grow and move ahead as a community. It's really aimed at addressing two key challenges that we're facing. The first of which is meeting our commitment to deliver on our mission to promote equitable, sustainable, and quality growth and development. The second, the second one really involves our disconnect between that mission and our ability to adequately implement the policies for the community's vision and growth. So essentially that puts us in a scenario where this project, the Our Missoula project, aligns with updating our codes to give us the tools that we need to better implement our policies, the practices or the values that our community state are important to us. My slides got a little out of order here, so I'm going to flip to this one first and then, oh, nope, this is great. Yep, I'm good. So I think many of you in this room, I see a lot of familiar faces that would agree that the city has been very successful at adopting visionary policies across our community that articulate our values and that set vision for how we want to grow and move forward as a community. So this includes what we at the city refer to as our North Star, the city growth policy that was adopted in 2015. It also includes things like the 2019 housing policy, the City of Missoula strategic plan, our long-range transportation plans and plans around connectivity, and our climate-ready work. So I think what most of you would agree with us on as well is that there's a bit of a disconnect in taking that next step, which would be updating our codes to provide us the tools that we need to implement those visionary policies across the community. When we talk about codes, we're talking about the city's development codes that influence the way we build out the physical built environment. And those include our zoning, our subdivision regulations, our street standards, and our parks and recs design codes. So this graphic before you really demonstrates just how complicated it is to develop a project within the city of Missoula today. We're still operating on a base code that was adopted in the early 70s and that we've tried to improve through the year through Band-Aid efforts while also adding new things to the code like the design excellence overlay and a new form-based code in the Mullen area. As Mayor Hess is really fond of saying, and I think it's a brilliant analogy or metaphor for the situation, our code today is like your kitchen junk drawer. When you're looking for something, you can open that drawer and dig around, and eventually you will find what you need, but it will take a long time. You will probably cut yourself in the process, and it's not the ideal situation. And this graphic is really small, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to show it anyways because I think it's such a great visualization of what we're trying to achieve through the Our Missoula process. As you can see, our policies sit at the top of any process, and looking at the current situation, we have our growth policy and our future land use map. Those are our guiding documents that both the community and our elected officials have asked us to operate under. As civil servants, we use those as essentially our operating or our marching orders. Next come our zoning and development codes. These are the tools that we have to help us implement those policies. And as you can see under the current situation, that link is essentially broken. So additionally, the tools that we do have often conflict with one another. They're unnecessarily complex to use and can be slow and unpredictable. So this results in poorer outcomes around housing, around connectivity, transportation, quality of life, and our climate goals. So the graphic on the right depicts what the Our Missoula project will achieve: a strong link or connection between our policies and our code, the tools that we have to actualize that policy. It also demonstrates through the creation of a unified development code, a code that is clear, well organized, easy to use, and has a predictable review process. And most importantly, that will result in those outcomes that we're trying to achieve: equitable development across our community, housing supply and cost that meets our community's needs, sustainability, and quality of life. So where are we in this project? That tends to be the most popular question that we get when we talk about code reform. We have moved through phase 1 and we are wrapping up phase 2 of this work, which really is focusing on defining the problem as we know it today. These initial phases required really intensive internal work, which is why from our side things might feel really quiet, but I want to assure you we've been engaging in a lot of work to get us to where we are today, and we're close to being able to present those recommendations to the community. So the work that was included in phase 1 and 2 consists of the creation of the Equity in Land Use report, which evaluates our existing land use policy and zoning regulations based on how well they support our social equity goals as a city and as a broader community. And those include advancing affordable housing as well. It also includes work around community form, examining the built condition, and explaining why the city looks the way it does today. That's important because it can inform us in terms of how we build out on the existing character within many of our neighborhoods. And lastly, this looked at our code and completed a really in-depth code audit or code analysis process, which really looked at how well is our code organized, what is its overall usability, how well does it or does it not align with our policies as it's written today. So from here, things are going to start to move much more quickly as we move into phase 3, looking at scenarios for the future. How do we want to see our community grow and change to achieve our goals? Looking at our growth policy and confirming our values as a community. Moving to the development of the code update, that unified development code, and then bringing these all before our elected officials alongside the rest of the community who's been involved throughout this process for adoption. So I want to talk just really quickly about what our engagement around this process looks like, because we're doing things a bit differently, and hopefully we'll continue to do things differently moving ahead. So you'll hear throughout this process, and you'll hear more from Len as well, that our goal with engagement for the Our Missoula process is to make sure that it's as inclusive and accessible as possible. So part of this approach includes our partnership with Common Good Missoula. And this partnership really focused on, again, achieving that goal of diverse, inclusive engagement. We started that through co-hosting and kicking off a broad community-wide event in December. And we'll continue to partner with Common Good Missoula on stakeholder table talks, some more in-depth, intimate conversations across our community, as well as community events. And really our focus there is to make sure that we're hearing from folks who historically have either not been invited to the table or who have been invited, but we haven't made adequate space for them in that conversation. And we want to make sure that at the end of the day, when we bring this code before our elected officials for adoption, it truly does represent the voices and the experiences of a broad section of people in our community. So with just my few minutes left, I want to touch briefly on Senate Bill 382. So Senate Bill 382 aims to overhaul the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act. And why that's important is that it will essentially change the way larger cities across the state engage in growth planning and development review. It will change the way that we function in terms of our processes that many of you are used to being involved in. So it's really based on the agreed upon premise that Montana's land use and planning statutes, they're outdated, they're inconsistent, they're duplicative, and they're overly bureaucratic. It also acknowledges that everyone is frustrated with them, from our elected officials, to our planning staff, to our developers, to the broader community. So who does this apply to? As I mentioned, it applies to big cities across the community, and really focuses on some of those bigger communities like Missoula, Kalispell, Bozeman. Other communities, smaller communities and counties can opt in though and continue to benefit from some of the more progressive policies within there. I'm going to quickly run through my last few slides because I'm out of time and I don't want to steal Paul's time. So timing and scope, we have 3 years to comply with most of the components in that act. And again, it changes statutes for all of our planning type activity, but one of the more important things that I want to highlight is it also changes the way that we engage with the public. Really looking at engagement through the planning process and through code adoption, and it narrows the space for public engagement on a project by project basis. And so that's why it's really important as we move to adoption of SB 382 that we get that message out that now is the time to be involved, and our prior practice of being involved as a project moves ahead is going to change. So what's next for us? We have a lot coming before the public and before council in the next few months that we want to make sure everyone is informed on. We'll be focusing on code this fall and spring. We'll be focusing on policy as well throughout the Our Missoula project. And we'll be focusing on some near-term code changes that came about through the current legislative process. A lot of those are paving the way for bigger changes within the code reform process. And lastly, how to stay engaged. We have some of you I know in the audience who have been closely following this project all along. And we hope that you continue to do that. The QR code that you saw on the screen earlier is a great way to track and follow the project and all of the current events that will be happening as a result of our engagement efforts. If you're new to the project, I'd also encourage you to go visit that Engage page. We have videos of our prior public events. We have educational videos on the Equity and Land Use Report. We have links to all of our documents. That's a great place to get up to date and then to reach out to us with any further questions that you have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Hello, everybody. Paul Forsting, IMEG. I'm a senior land use planner over at IMEG. We work on entitlements, rezone, subdivisions, all those good stuff. And so when we talk about code reform, we talk about rewriting the code, it impacts me and what I do as a professional. It's something no slides for me. I'm just going to wing it. Yeah, notes are for amateurs. Somebody great. So, yeah. So when we talk about those kind of things, I'm very passionate about it. Just personally, I really care about housing. That's what I'm into. I really love the house I have. I can look back and think of all the important roles that house provided for me and my family. So I just think positively, and when I think about a community, you can strip away any element, but if you take away the housing, then I don't think you have a community anymore. And so we need to support housing, we need to embrace it, and we really need to take a hard look at how we approve housing and how we create more housing. As a practitioner, I'm very supportive of this code rewrite for practical reasons. One, I'd like to see houses approved quicker. My clients would like to see houses approved quicker. We work with builders, developers, property owners. All of those folks want to see an expedited process. I personally believe and professionally believe that will create a better scenario here for our community with housing. We can spend less time in the conversation of is it appropriate for housing to go in a certain location and more time on perfecting the design. How does it fit in our neighborhood? What amenities can we offer for folks in these housing units? We don't want to see time, money, effort lost on something at the end of the day we're going to agree is acceptable, that we want in our community. I'm also the past president of the Building Industry Association. I was president last year. We co-authored a letter in support of the code rewrite with the organization of realtors here, and so really across the board there's support for these changes. We all have our own interest in why we want to see them change, but at the end of the day it benefits everybody. It benefits me and my clients, and it also benefits the public staff that we have working for us. You know, they're really in a tough spot. I at least know where I stand. I go into an application, I'm going to fight for my client. We're going to get it approved if everything goes our way, if the rules are right, and I do my job. But when I work with a planner and they're at the city, county, wherever they're at, they may look at the rules and say, well, this thing's approvable, but then they get in front of the public and the public just starts really directing a lot of frustration at them, saying, hey, this isn't what we want. And so that's really tough. That's a tough spot to be in, and I'm not envious of that at all. And so when we look at the code, we should make it more front-loaded, which I've heard that we want to see done. So take less of that stress out of the conversation for our hardworking public partners. Yeah, for sure. And those are things I want to see. I'm excited to see more houses in our community where we want them. We have a great growth policy, the Missoula 2035, I believe it is. It's a great policy, has a lot of infill, inward growth. But what it doesn't have is the matching zoning for it. And so anytime we want to go and implement the goals of that plan, we have to go in front of the public and say, hey, we're going to update the zoning in this neighborhood. And that's a lengthy process. You're having a difficult conversation on single individual pieces of property. We might be talking about adding a couple houses in a place that has infrastructure, water, sewer, all the utilities that we need. And it shouldn't be that difficult. And that difficulty is really unnecessary, and it adds cost at the end of the day. What I've noticed in my, 17 years now, which isn't that long, but in my experience, what I've noticed is that our community in Missoula here, we're not necessarily able to take advantage of a positive swing in the housing market. Let's take 2015, 2016, 2017. People are ramping up saying, wow, the economy's starting to rebound here. We want to build more houses in Missoula. And that was the situation. That's what people are coming to me talking about it. Well, it took several years for folks to get those houses online. Some of them are still trying to get those houses online. And what's happened over those years? Everything's gotten more expensive. Everything changed. Where if we were building those in 2016, 17, 18, those are $300,000 brand new construction houses. If you look at the market today, those are $600,000 houses. What happened? 5 years passed. That when we look at the housing cycle over decades, that's what happens. You ramp up, you build your houses, and then it cools down. Well, if we can't hit those bubbles, then where are we going? We're going to get exponentially more expensive here. We need to shorten the time period it takes to build houses. So that's all I got.
Hello, everybody. Let me see. Is this on? Oh, yeah, it is. Okay. Hi, I'm Len Broberg from Common Good, Missoula. Good to see so many people here. Really excited to have the chance to get all of you to know a little bit about Common Good, Missoula, and share a little bit of our thoughts on where we might go with this code reform process and the growth policy process. And thanks, Eran and Paul, for sharing your insights, and I look forward to the questions you all might have for any of us. It's all part of learning about how we might craft a future that would be better for Missoula. And I thank City Club for the opportunity to speak. So you can see the Common Good logo up here on the slide, and a description of what we're about. Really, in short form, we work in the social justice, equity, and climate resilience space here in Missoula, trying to make those things more a reality here. Common Good Missoula was founded in May of 2021, so it's a relatively recent arrival on the scene here. But the thing is it's really made up of members of civic organizations around Missoula who have been in place for years and years. And so what we're really doing is bringing those organizations together, sharing our diverse membership and the diverse audiences we can reach, and bringing those forward then to work in these public processes to help us make progress in a way that's better informed perhaps than we've been in the past. Just as some examples of members organizations, so you have an idea about that. From the health realm, we have All Nations and Partnership Health Center. In the faith realm, we have First United Methodist Church and St. Francis, just as examples. On the environmental side, we have Climate Smart and Families for a Livable Climate. On the community side, we have Welcome Back and Democratic Socialists of America. We have neighborhood groups like Neighbors in Action for Franklin the Fort. It's just one example of several that are members in our organization. So Common Good follows a little bit different organizing model, or actually a lot different organizing model than you might be familiar with in a lot of places. And that is, rather than the heads in these organizations getting together and saying, this is a really important issue, let's go out and get everybody excited about it and bring them along. Instead, we go out and we talk to people. And as we talk to people in the community and bring those expressed concerns, ideas, benefits, changes they want to see together, we then can get a picture of what are broad-based issues that people are concerned about from many different walks of life. And so then we organize around those issues. So the citizens essentially tell us what we're supposed to do. And we figure out how to try and go and make that a reality. So an example of that, of the work that we did, well, first we educated folks by partnering with the city, as Eran referred to, on what was called a Civic Academy, where we got about 250 people from across Missoula to come and learn about the growth policy code reform process of our Missoula, what that might look like, how long it was going to take, and get people kind of up to speed and interested in the process. And I think 250 people at a planning meeting is a pretty good turnout. Then from there, we moved on to doing what we called table talks, very similar to what you're going to engage in here in a moment here. And that is, we go out and gather people together from all over Missoula and have them share with us individually what they had as concerns. Again, referring back to that organizing process. So we compile all those. We've actually shared those with the city and their engagement staff. And from that, and you see images here, 3 of them are table talks. The 4th one is a training, but that's another thing that we do in the community. But through that process, a couple of things emerged, and it's no surprise what they are really, and these aren't ranked in terms of 1 or 2. They're just bulleted that way. Affordable housing was really important, what we're talking about today, hopefully, and walking, biking, and rolling safety, especially for children and the older population here in Missoula. So that's decided what we were going to work on. And from there, we started working on these issues. And this is just one example of, our lead example of how we're working with the walking and rolling and biking safety, and it's what we call the neighbor ways concept. It's a picture that shows how you would take existing pavement, turn it into a safe walking, rolling, and biking space, but still have 2 lanes of traffic going each way and parking. And we're working with the city to try and implement a demonstration of this on maybe 5 or so blocks in the city of Missoula in the coming year. But what we're here about today really is about housing and what are we going to do, or what are we hearing from people, and what do we take as our kind of position at this point in this process to move forward on those issues. We're in that process, we're doing research of what has happened around the country, what's been successful, what is not, including talking to housing advocates from around the country. As we talk to those people and do that research, one thing that's emerged very clearly, and that is there is no one provision that you can put into a zoning code or a growth policy or subdivision regulations that will result in affordable housing. It is an enormously complicated and interacting process that will involve a suite of provisions, a suite of changes that will then enable us to have the flexibility and ability to fill that affordable housing niche in the market. So that's what Common Good Missoula will advocate for. And we're still working on exactly what that looks like, but that's kind of the general outline of where we're going. The other thing to be aware of here is that passing just a few without passing the complete list may prove an obstacle to the creation of the needed housing. And so we're really going to have to think deeply and work hard on trying to come up with a full slate of possibilities which will open up the market and allow us to obtain the kind of needed housing where regular folks can afford to continue to live in Missoula. Senate Bill 382, which Eran mentioned, has some options for doing just that, and the city is going to have to select between those options. There's 5 they have to pick, but that's fine. But we may want the whole list. We may want more than the list. We may want a subset of the list. Who knows? But we're going to end up looking at doing that after we've really crafted a common vision here in Missoula, which is the next process in the Our Missoula process. Hearing from citizens what works and what doesn't, what their concerns are, in order to craft an effective tool to work forward towards that affordable housing. So we're really wary of a piecemeal process, some of which has been forced on the city by the state and the state regulations and stuff that was passed in the last legislative session. But we need to be really careful about that because piecemeal efforts could end up frustrating success in the future. So what we want is a coherent package that will get us to where we need to go. Second, or finally, it's critical that Missoula residents understand that involvement now is essential because in the future, it is very likely that individual project level public participation will be greatly reduced. And so now is the time for folks to join and tell us what they see as the future for Missoula and what they need and what they want to see. And we're looking forward as an organization to bringing those voices forward, those many voices in Missoula. And as Eran said, some that may not have been present in prior processes, which they really need to be there. So we close by inviting those in the development community as well to tell us, what are your needs? What do you have to have in place in order to be able to provide affordable housing? And we look forward to working in the Missoula process and to make the needed change a reality. Thank you, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Table talk is an extraordinarily rich part of every City Club forum and arguably the gist of why we're here. We will take about 10 minutes for each table to introduce themselves and come up with one question related to the presentation to ask the panel. A board member with a mic will come around afterward for a volunteer from each table to ask the agreed upon question. Please refer to the slide for the guidelines regarding Q&A. As I said at the beginning, we are committed to civil discourse, so we ask that you keep your question respectful. We ask that you avoid making statements so we can get to as many questions as possible. We also ask that any members of the media save their questions until after the forum. Our panelists should be able to stick around after the forum ends. When asking your question, please stand up, introduce yourself, avoid statements, and ask one question. Please be respectful of others and don't interrupt while questions are being asked. The board will manage anything they feel needs to be addressed. We have 2 people with microphones that will come to your table to have you ask your question. Please raise your hand to let them know you have a question. Thank you.
So what we're interested in, the question we have is growth policies, I think, are intended to precede code reform, and we're looking at codes right now and how they might not be applicable. But we're wondering why we're not looking at the growth policy first, and then decide. So you say the growth policy says, well, how many houses do we need? Where do we need them? What kinds of housing do we need? And then look at the codes that can, realize that vision that the public comes up with. And I think that maybe the 382 might require that the growth policy be reviewed every 5 years, and I think that we should. So I'm wondering when, why the order is the way it is now.
Thanks, Bob. That's a great question. So the work that we're undergoing through the code audit is really about how we use the code. Are there conflicts within it? Is it user-friendly? Is it duplicative? And is it just too complex? And so that's the work underway right now. That will help inform how the code shifts, but I think what you're talking about is, do we have the tools that we need within the code to actualize some of our visions and values? And that work will start with the growth policy update, which will happen in a future phase. And then that growth policy update, we hope will confirm that we're on the right track with the goals outlined in the 2015 adopted growth policy, which was a very visionary document, well ahead of its time. But we might also identify new vision and values that aren't articulated in that growth policy that we need to incorporate. And then the following step will be what we're referring to as code innovations. How do we need to innovate our code? What tools do we need to add to the now cleaner code that is more user-friendly, that has removed those conflicts or those duplications? How do we innovate it to add new tools to help us actualize those vision and values that we maybe hadn't articulated or addressed before? And so it's a bit of a multi-phase process. But we agree with you. We can't have the conversation about crafting a final code until we've confirmed and had the discussion about our values as a community. So that step will come first.
Okay, over. Is that done? Okay. Hi, thanks for the presentations and City Club for feeding us. We had a pretty good discussion about our unhoused population here and wanted to thank Eran for bringing up how we're sourcing voices that aren't usually at the table. So our unhoused population being a pretty big group that's excluded often from conversations like this. Wondering between you three if you have any idea on what we can focus on when we when we're going over the zoning changes we can make, where if we are fast tracking building or getting more housing in Missoula, how we can ensure that no to low income housing is being incentivized for the developers so that Missoulians who currently live here that are falling into poverty and cycles of homelessness, that we kind of stop that bleeding and aren't just looking for prospective Missoulians who are moving into town, into this potential new housing. Also noting that I think the median income is somewhere under 60,000. Okay. So yeah, noting that it's about 60,000 median income, how are we ensuring that the low to no income need here is being met through this process?
I can start, and then if Paul or Len have things to add. I think one of the key conversations that we'll be having as a community is what do we implement across the board and what do we reserve as an incentive to do just that, incentivize the construction of deed restricted, which means it's protected far into the future, housing that Missoulians can afford at all levels. And those conversations are happening nationwide around things like parking, building height, density. Do we just eliminate parking like many cities across the nation have done as a best practice to increase housing production? Do we allow for increased heights in various parts of town to, again, allow for more homes to be built? Or do we hold some of those back and say, if you'd like no parking as opposed to reduced parking, we're going to ask that you create X number of units at X income levels. And so those are types of things and trade-off conversations that cities across the nation are facing. We're doing the hard work right now of trying to figure out where those levers can be pulled to hit that magic spot. Because it's never parking alone, as Len mentioned. It's never height alone. It's never setbacks alone. It's a combination of all those things kind of at the perfect levels that lead to affordability. And so how do we offer enough of those across the board to spur development so homes at all prices can be built? And how do we preserve enough to where we can really incentivize in a meaningful way the creation of that permanent affordable housing that we also know our community needs? And so that's hard work we're doing with our consultants right now to identify those kind of pinch points or where we can be the most impactful. And then the conversation about those trade-offs is a conversation that we need to have with the broader community to understand values in those areas.
Yeah, let me just add, I think we need to be aggressive with our incentives for that very bottom tier of housing. There's some, it takes a real specialty outfit to do affordable housing. They understand the tax code, they're large enough project, and it works for them. There's a lot of other developers in our community who would like to do it. They just operate on a more market-based business platform. They need to buy the property at market base, they got to build it. And so they need incentives to make it work, or they're just going to build a for market property thing. So because they just don't have anything else going. They might be doing one building at a time. So we really need to incentivize that. I think we incentivize housing across the board, but we'd be really aggressive with that bottom section. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to address the issue of having those voices present as part of the conversation, I think Common Good Missoula is very much aiming at trying to involve those voices, to understand their needs, to understand what a transition for them from unhoused to housed might look like and what would work for them, and bring that into the process.
So, can you hear me? So our table discussed the what are the specific code reforms to facilitate ADU and multi-generational housing development.
So I can speak to some of the changes that have already occurred or are underway, and Paul might have some anecdotal experiences too with some of the folks that he's working with about what's tough. So ADU development is kind of a tough nut to crack. There's the regulatory component, and we made some significant changes a couple of years ago in that regard. We removed what's called the owner occupancy requirement that states that if you own the primary home, you have to live in it if you want to build and rent out an ADU on that property. That's been removed. Parking requirements for ADU have been removed. We're making some changes based on legislative mandates in this session to further remove some design standards around ADU and some other regulatory components. And so we will have a very progressive set of ADU regulations within the next couple of months. That does not solve the financial barriers to constructing an ADU. It's very difficult to finance the construction of an ADU. And that is something that we've been long talking with and trying to collaborate with the financial sector on. I think until we can crack that nut, I think we are still going to see very few ADUs developed.
Hi there. Thanks for hosting this. I'm Bradley Layton. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Montana. And just first a couple things. One thing that I did notice that the city did really well a few years ago, they eliminated building permits for rooftop solar, for example. That was one part of the junk drawer that was removed. I think the county still has a few challenges in terms of integration, especially between county health and the building department. I'm on a committee to help with that too. But as we move from sort of the junk drawer model to more of the pegboard model, perhaps, I don't know if that's an appropriate analogy. Our specific question from our table is what in the code regulations might help us do more projects. And I'm thinking of things where we convert from a commercial location into more residential, like we saw over at the Sawmill District, for example. Just asking as an example, because I think that's a foreseen need, at least from our table. Thanks.
You know, one way that we address that is through something called adaptive reuse. And our adaptive reuse code really addresses how you can reuse spaces, how you can convert commercial spaces to residential spaces, how we can look at some of our historic spaces and adapt the use of those to meet current needs today while protecting those historic and cultural resources in our community. And so that topic definitely has a lot of relevance and weight for us in our code conversation. We want to streamline things. We want to make the development process easier. We want to look at our permitting processes and look at our decision-making processes, some of which recent legislation has changed to make things more administrative as opposed to legislative, which means staff can make more decisions as opposed to them going to our elected officials and the body of city council. But I think specifically focusing on those adaptive reuse questions, how do we make the reuse of the buildings that we have today easier? Because we know that also makes things more affordable. Using structures that we have today, preserving housing that we have today costs pennies on the dollar as opposed to building new. And so that's a big focus of ours.
Good to see you again, Brad. One thing that I would use this opportunity to bring up is that it's complicated dealing with any one of these changes of the various provisions. For instance, building height. Yes, we could relieve building height, and that would allow more units to be built on a site. But We need to be careful we're not shading out rooftop solar units that individuals have invested in and plan on a certain return from, and we need to be sure we're not shading out gardens that individuals are growing their own food on. That's an example of the complexity that we face, and why in some cases maybe incentives may be necessary. The state has kind of tied our hands in dealing with some of the solar issues, but they haven't blocked incentives yet in that area. But it's just one example of how complicated this is and how we have to be careful and thoughtful about it so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot.
Hello, my name is John Maslanik, and I'm a business broker based here in Missoula. Our table came up with a question that, and this is maybe for you, Eran, in particular, but the others too. How does the city's vision integrate with the county's vision for development? And what mechanisms are in place for you to work together or address conflicts between the county's goals and the city's goals?
That's a great question. There's very little we do without collaborating with or partnering with the county and the planning division over there. A great example of that is our involvement in their recent code overhaul and update, and they came out of it smiling, and so we hope to too. But and they're equally involved in ours. We also really plan more closely on this ring around Missoula called the Urban Growth Boundary, and we have what is called the Urban Growth Commission, which are key positions within the city and the county at the department head level, public works, planning, our economic development entities, to make sure that we are having those conversations and we're remaining aligned. We have to constantly remind ourselves as municipal employees that where that line between city and county is very important to us, because code can change and requirements can change, and we need to be able to educate the community about that. To you all, where that line in the sand lives is often irrelevant, and so we need to make sure that we align our codes as much as possible and that we understand each other's goals and share goals as much as possible as well, to make things easier for our constituents.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Matt Tomey. I work with Cushing Terrell here in Missoula. Something we talked about at our table was clearly defining the front end type of stuff. So we have, I'm from a design background as well, so having the yes or no and not living in the gray. So since you guys are wrapping up phase 2, I'm curious, from your perspective so far, what are those things that you are seeing really need to be defined and are the most essential items to create that clear path forward, instead of a lot of those gray areas that can be debatable?
Well, what I would say is, and I'm sure it's for Eran, the question, but what I would say is make as much as possible administratively approvable. Allow the planning staff to do their job. A developer looks at a plan, says this is what's going to go on. The planning staff reviews the application and says, yes, this can go on. And as quick as we can get an approval in place for where it makes sense for growth, then we should have that. That's what as a practitioner, that's what I would like to see. Give power to the planners, and so they don't have to say, well, I don't know the answer to this, and so you're going to get the answer to this important development question at the very back end, in front of the city council or the county commissioners, whoever that might be. It's too much risk involved with that. It's too herky-jerky, and those decision makers already have a lot of important things to do for us in our community. So as much as we can give our really talented planning staff, empower them to help the process along, the better process we're going to have.
And that really is what Senate Bill 382 strives to accomplish. So by front loading a lot of that public engagement and feedback in the policy decisions that are made on the front end so that our elected officials can benefit from understanding what the community's values and vision are when setting that policy. And then once that policy is set, again, as civil servants, that policy serves as our marching orders. We have that in hand. And now, as Paul points out, we need to apply that in a way that is predictable and streamlined, so folks can get in and get out and get their project built. We are also really focusing on, get to yes when we can get to yes, and that is our job. We want to see these projects move ahead. But when the answer is no, if the answer is no, because the regulations say it is, because our values have led to us creating policies that say no, we want to communicate that no as quickly as possible too, right? So a developer can then shift that project or look for a new project or a new location. So that's our goal as well, to create a code that is predictable and easy to use, but also to be able to communicate those no's as quickly as possible when they come.
Thank you. I'm Mary Laporte with the League of Women Voters, and we had a interesting discussion at our table also related to this front-end process from another perspective, and that is how can we build trust among our citizens whilst in the process of streamlining regulations, and how do we make sure that protections are ensured, especially protections related to the environment, equity, and I guess justice.
I guess I'll take that one on first, and that is from common goods perspective, that's why I urged and noted that we really need to have the citizenry broadly involved as we set the policies and understanding as best as we can the implications of those policies. We're going to make some mistakes, it's a given, right, because it's enormously complex. But to try and have the community at large across as many sectors as possible buying into and understanding why one path is better than another path, or why one path is what is set in the regulations and another path. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to be satisfied. That's not a given necessarily, but I think we do need to be careful to pay attention to people's interests and concerns and bring those to the fore and make the conscious decision of weighing those trade-offs in a thoughtful and meaningful manner.
Okay, our table we've got, my name is David Gray. So we had a question on affordable housing. So under the zoning code, there's a great deal of city policy, which is stopping affordable housing from taking place for ceiling heights, for amounts of glazing, 300% increase in glazing over what a normal residential would have. That's a city minimum. So all these rules are, well, the other rule is changing underlying zoning through an overlay, which eviscerates density along the commercial thoroughfares. What is the city looking at doing in the zoning code to encourage and not stop affordable housing from taking place?
That's a great question, and I think it also speaks to Len's prior comments about the interrelation of all of these different things. I think our code as it exists today, as frustrating as it is a demonstration of some of the values that were in place when those policies were set, whether it was the base code in 1970 or whether it's more recent policy documents that have resulted in code shifts that we're dealing with today. And so things like height, addressing, view shed, things like overlays that prevent density, addressing keeping neighborhoods small. And so those are values that we have to revisit. We have to talk about because it is a trade-off. That when we have overlays that reduce density, we have fewer homes, which mean the homes that we have are more expensive. When we protect our view sheds above density, we get to still have those beautiful mountain views, but less of us get to have them. And so I think those are the exact type of value conversations and trade-off conversations that we have to have as a community. If we truly want affordability, what does that mean for our other values? And where do we make trade-offs, but where do we hold steady? Because those are core values of our community, and those are things that we need to, in collaboration with all of you, decide upon.
So, I guess good afternoon, everyone. My name's John Brock, the Emily Brock who works for the county. Full disclosure there. She works with county planning. But my question is not related to her job, fortunately. We've been hearing about affordable housing. And at our table, somebody suggested that maybe workforce housing was a better phrase. And someone else said, wait a minute, that's going to be a trigger. And I think this relates to another question, but maybe to emphasize that question. We're in a divided time, and even the language we use cannot be passed off as synonyms because there are triggers involved in a lot of things. And you know, a question for our Missoula is not so much about language, because I trust that you're going to be working on that, and I trust that you're going to be working on trust, but how are you preparing yourself for challenges that will inevitably come in any kind of a civic project, especially one of this scope? And maybe the question is for everyone in the community is, how are you preparing yourself to start with a presumption of trust and go from there?
You know, trust is an interesting thing. The regulations were put in place to clarify stuff, but they seem to take away from the trust that somebody's going to do a good job. We don't trust you're going to do a good job, so we're going to make sure through regulations that you do a good job. Some of our most attractive neighborhoods in the city of Missoula were built way before regulations existed. Big developer came, platted thousands of lots, the university, slant streets, these areas that we really enjoy and we're trying to replicate through development were created without any regulations. This was just what they wanted to do, and they made them beautiful, and we really love those areas. Well, we layer on all these regulations, and then it's kind of a game to get around the regulations. How can I do it cheaper? How can I do it less desirable almost? Not that people want it to be undesirable, but it's really difficult, yes, to get to a point where we're going to trust each other that people just on their own are going to do it without some profit-seeking motive. So I think the trust from a developer standpoint is, who do I talk to in the process? Who do I negotiate with? And that's why I said an administrative process. Give that over to the planners and say, how do I make this nice enough where you'll approve it? And then the community then trusts those decision makers without at the very back end saying, well, we don't like this and we don't like it at all. So yeah, trust is, I think that's a key word that people keep bringing up, and it's something in general in our society we're going to have to improve.
And when I think about this project, what strikes me is that people care a great deal about this. I don't have a single conversation about code reform that isn't full of emotion. And that's because people care a great deal about their neighborhoods, and they care a great deal about this community. And that's an amazing problem to have for us. It means this might take a little bit longer. It means we need to listen deeply. It means conversations are absolutely going to be hard. Going back to David's question, it might come down to view shed versus affordability. And those are hard conversations that we have to have in our community. And they're not going to be easy. In my prior life, I relocated a homeless shelter. And those conversations often held the same level of emotion because people in this community care deeply about people who are struggling, about their children, about their homes, about their neighborhoods. And that to me just means that when we get to the other side of this, that we really are going to have a code that reflects us and that helps us achieve our outcomes and that helps protect our values as a community. But it's going to be tough going through it, which is why we invite you now, and we'll invite you again, and we'll invite you back to keep engaging, even when it feels difficult, because we won't have a code that reflects everyone if we can't keep everyone engaged.
Thank you. My name is Gregory. Happy to be here. Question building on an earlier one about the integration with the county. But beyond that, there's a lot of folks who commute either into Missoula, but also the developers in the surrounding counties as well. As this process continues, how will those surrounding communities potentially be impacted and influenced by these changes?
Well, let me start by saying that we do a lot of work outside of Missoula County. A lot of work in the county, a lot of work in the city, and a lot of work in Mineral County, Ravalli County, and those are people who would like to live in the city of Missoula. A large part of our workforce commutes in from out of the county, which is an incredible thing. It blows my mind, people driving in from wherever. And so we need to take responsibility for our community and our growth and find homes for these folks who want to live here instead of sending them down the Bitterroot Valley. So they can commute in. I mean, that's just a basic planning principle is you don't want sprawling development that stretches out into our valleys. We want it here in Missoula, but it's really difficult for those of us who live here. I drive through my neighborhood every day and I say, gosh, what would happen if more houses come here? But that's what everybody had. That's the conversation everybody's having.
I think one thing we really want to focus on in our community conversations too is acknowledging that there's an aspect of choice here, right? What we would love to see is that if you want to live on a half acre or an acre lot, you have animals, you like the lifestyle that brings, that you get to choose to drive down to Lolo or to drive to some other areas in our community that provide you that opportunity. But for folks who want to live in city limits, who want to have that smaller footprint, who want to have more of a walkable neighborhood, that you get to choose that too, right? You're not relegated to kind of our outskirts because of affordability. And so going back to the concept of making sure that people have that choice is really important to us.
Thank you, Eran, Paul, and Lynn, for all you do for our community and for your participation in this panel. There will be QR codes for the city and registration for their newsletter at the registration desk. Again, thank you to all of our sponsors, especially First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications. And of course, thank you to you all for being here and participating. We are working on the finishing touches of our December forum. It will be fun. It will be lighthearted. We won't get into anything too serious, but we will have more details on our Facebook page and website. So be on the lookout for it and bring your holiday cheer. Have a great week.